Today we have with us Ahmed Rashid. He's a well-known author and journalist whose writings in the past, as I think most of you will know, have focused on politics, particularly about extremism and militancy. But today we're here to listen to poetry. And can I show them the book, please? And the book is This Side of the River. It's a compilation of his poems from the almost decade he spent in Balochistan. Now, Ahmed, I asked you when we spoke on the phone for an idiosyncratic bio, because I like to see how writers perceive themselves. So in the absence of that, would you like to add something about yourself?
Well,
aside from the politics.
Huh?
Aside from politics.
These poems were written over a period of 10 years in the 1980s, and they've been catching dust ever since. I really wanted them out because I think they deal with a very important part of Pakistan's history and also my life. It's where the two merged. Unfortunately, I've never been inspired enough to continue writing poetry after that. I wrote poetry when I was very young and when I was in Balochistan, and then I stopped, frankly. And I thought maybe the publication of this book would get me to restart writing poetry. I've written five non-fiction books, and I mean, when you write non-fiction, it kind of drains you of any ability to do poetry or a novel or something else.
So you stopped writing and you just didn't look back, stopped writing poetry, that is, and you just didn't look back and didn't want to write again, or there was no inspiration?
No, I was very sad that I'd stopped writing. I mean, I made a lot of effort to write, but I was writing rubbish. So it was better that I didn't write.
Because these poems are very good. To me, they're inspired by the English canon, but you might want to say more about that before you start reading.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of these poems is to create stories, to tell stories in the way that many people in Balochistan do, telling stories through song, through music, and through poetry. And the fact is that I think every poem tells a story, and but they're also very emotional. They're about very emotional subjects, and they're love poems. So it's a wide scope of poetry that you're dealing with.
Can I read that note which I just showed you about your time in Balochistan? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So because we have a lot of young people here, I thought I'd ask Ahmed about the background behind the poems. Because the poems are largely about Balochistan, at least the second section, which is the larger part. So he gave me this. Ahmed Rashid spent 10 years of his youth from the age of 22 from 1972 till 1980. Is that correct? Right. In Balochistan. And you said that from 1973 to 1979, you were part of a Marxist socialist movement because Pakistan at the time had a strident left which fought to bring social change. So this time in Bangladesh took place after the split with in Balochistan, sorry, where am I going? So this time he spent in Balochistan took place after the split with Bangladesh, around the time that Bhutto dissolved the local government. Balochistan had a long tradition of anti-state rebellion. The Baloch were deprived of national resources, and the movement of which you were part was not about separatism, which is the motive of the current movement. It was about bringing a socialist system and uniting the country through it, because at that it was a time of revolutions throughout the world, so it kind of fits into the larger picture also. So would you like to go on from here? And start with the poems?
I think it was a very traumatic period in Pakistan's history with the loss of Bangladesh, and people of my generation never really got over it, and certainly denounced all the leadership of the country who had created such a situation that our country was divided between the two of us. And that, of course, the division of Pakistan led to movements in Sindh, in Balochistan, in what was then the frontier province, for a change of government, a change of just a change in the ways the country was governed. Unfortunately, now a lot of the movements that at that time were socialist movements have become separatist movements. For example, in Balochistan, the Baloch insurgency is still going on, except it's become a separatist movement. In KP province, you've got now Pakistani Taliban insisting on carving out their own state in the tribal areas. And in Sindh and Sindh, problems with MQM and others, you also got a separatist movement. So that really has been the fault of our leaders, who failed to give basic rights to the citizens of the four provinces, comprising many different ethnic groups. And so we are faced with this worsening situation where fragmentation becomes the new political norm of radicals and extremists. And that is very much to be regretted and to be fought against.
So I'm going to ask you to start reading from the poems now, because the poems, even if they're about fighting, there's more about humanity in them, and you can hear the voice of a young man. So why don't you start?
Sorry. I have no way of saying this gently. The shade of the tree is delicately stretched, swaying with the breeze from east to west. Around me, children beautiful come and go, barefoot in rags, their shiny faces raised to the merciless sun. The recent mother girl comes and sits before me, hiding her face in a chadar, pushing back her single plait of thick black hair. Sister, I have no other way of saying this gently. Your husband killed in battle, your brother lost. Freedom's hunger claimed them and their love for this soil, these rocks. She sits stunned, then slowly shakes from side to side, trying not to push back her plait of thick black hair. A single tear travels down the curve of cheek. Now their eyes have nowhere to wander, there is no light. But I could not ask for death to come, a better way in battle for their country and with their comrades. They did not run or show fear, she asks me straight. I easily reply, they stood upright as spears, brave as lions, their honor intact, they will always be remembered. O woman, mutilated by the absence of so many, your broken dreams, like the jagged pieces of the moon, now pierce me. So a ring of stars is smashed to show the light of galaxies. Sitting under this tree of silence, surrounded by the noise of children's play, she pushes back her plait of shining black hair. Two very short ones. This is the sea. 6 dry years spent longing for the swell and surge, the song of oceans, in a single shell resounding. Most comrades have never seen the sea. I describe it and fail. They imagine it to be like the sky. Yes, but the tremendous motion, the heave of waves like a woman's body, shudders to leave such aching beauty. Even the blue is not the same. Turquoise, magenta, purple variations, impossible to tame such a wild complexion. Once I took a comrade to the beach. He was too stunned to speak. I could not reach him for a soundless hour. And there's one more short one. I have long owed you, for G. I have long owed you words, the depth of love you have showered on this battered, dented man. I walk with great hollows inside me, cutting deep like trees, chopped in their trunk, and your sad, delicate patience has patched me in places I had long ago forgotten. For a long time I have lain anchor in an unknown sea, hearing only your footsteps on the smooth beach, rising and falling. You have carried your burden of absence and loss for too long. The clouds are in moody turmoil, shifting from black to white to disappear in a clear blue sky. And I have seen the rain gather in your sad, beautiful eyes when you reach that state where so much ceases to matter. Nights such as these I scare for your innocence, your outpourings of clarity, but with you I have shaken off winter prematurely and called in spring, for seasons dissolve in your fragile hands. In all my withered days I have never been touched by such tenderness. Refugee winter. The roads are blocked, the gorges are impassable. Landslides of snow echo all along the mountains in the freezing ink of night. The thin, winding river disappears under a sheet of ice. Dogs snarl hungrily as huts crash down on weary sleepers. It is desperately cold. Winter is so hard in a strange country. This one's called Winter Morning. The sun rolls over the horizon at dawn, bathing each dew-laden blade of grass with light. The mountains shift off their slumber. Water warms under a sky of fantastic cold color. Two goats, stranded when the people fled, already at their morning munch, as the cook warms his hands on their udders, milking them. The lookout looms out of the dawn light, wrapped in silence. We roll over, rinse and dry, the shivering dew on our rifles. Morning bread is eaten leisurely, toasting our toes in the ashes. But the mist is rising in the valley. Our heads rise in unison when the whack-whack of helicopter blades comes knifing through the chilled air. Beyond the peak, below the slope, swarm thousands of troops. There across the river, among the trees, even from the blue space above, they're looking for us. Moving off up through the rocks, we joke at them. A raw wind snapping branches carries the possibility of spring. From one end of Balochistan to the other, a fire has been lit. A fire has been lit. Which one do you? Okay. I'm happy. You want to say, ask me anything else?
I don't think they've given us any time.
Well, I read you one more.
Yes.
Some poems go on for 2-3 pages, and they're the long narrative poems. They actually tell a whole story of describing a tribesman, his love affair, the fact that the husband shoots him, Okay, I'm reading one more poem, then we'll have a Q&A. Quetta. I return to this tree once every year or so, seen it slip into seasons squared by the unmovable courtyard. Now it is autumn, the death of green. The shoots that could not make it through the summer wither. Russet, then yellow, encroach the living sap. Last summer the leaves danced briskly in the dazzling sun, holding their own on what wind gusts tried to do. Now they shuffle like old women, fall cluttering the mud-baked courtyard. As a child I loved running in the gardens, wading through stashed autumn leaves like dunes, kicking myself free, hating the gardeners with their wrinkled faces, long brooms, and barrows sweeping the fun away. Today the sullen city slumbers in fear and decay. The gardeners are gone. Instead, police and soldiers in a dozen different uniforms tramp the roadsides, and children hug the shop fronts, eyes down, terrified of being stopped. Sunset, and in a whisk the streets lie deserted. Every month ushers in her own seasons, the barely perceptible change of color, shape, and attitude of trees and grass. Winter is burying the city in her sheet so silently, while the children dream of more light than the sun can spare. Yeah. Thank you.
So everybody, the book will be available at the book fair, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and we have 5 minutes for Q&A. Or would you like more poems? Go ahead.
The culture of Balochistan and the rich poetry and music there affected how you wrote.
How I?
How you wrote your poetry. What was the influence of the culture in Balochistan on the poetry itself?
Well, this is, I mean, the Baloch are still a tribal, nomadic society, which is completely different to what we're used to in the rest of Pakistan. And with a very strong code of honor, etc. And so it's very, I mean, all the four provinces have very different disciplines, um, uh, ethnic groups, literature, poetry, and it's really none of this has been given any importance by the governments, since 1947. And that's been really strange because many of these minority ethnic groups consider themselves now to be completely alienated from the state, which is why we're seeing all these uprisings take place right across the country. We've not accommodated the Balochi language or even the Pashto language, or it's individuals who've accommodated these and tried to fund, poetry sessions, but the state has done very little. And until we get over this hang-up and we actually devote some of our resources to developing the literature and culture of ethnic groups, we are going to have conflict after conflict.
So we know that you have written extensively. The list of your political writings is very long. What brought you to this genre of poetry? What brought you to poetry after writing extensively?
What brought me round to writing poetry? Well, I mean, there was a practical reason. You couldn't carry around wads of paper to write a novel. And poetry you could write at the back of cigarette packs and other things. No, I mean, seriously, I had been a poet at school and college when I was younger. And some of my useful poems are in this. So it's not that this suddenly came out of the blue. I had been writing as a young man and as a student in particular, especially a lot of love poetry, as you can imagine, being a student. And there are deep-seated origins of this.
So you mentioned writing poetry on the back of cigarette packs, and you mentioned also in the introduction to this, or in the foreword, that a lot of them were kind of retrieved by your comrades, right?
Yeah, well, this is only about half the poems. The other half I lost, unfortunately. Invariably, the files used to be placed on the back of a donkey, and if the donkey collapsed or went through water or something, the whole poetry would be lost. And so there were a lot of poems that were lost, in fact. Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that writing a book or a novel is accessed from a different aspect of yourself. And is it true that poetry comes from a different part of yourself? And that in writing both of these, there's some kind of a completion, a coming full circle?
I can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
The echo is too much in the room.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah?
I hope so.
You mentioned that writing books, political books and novels, came from a different part of yourself.
Right.
And that writing poetry and accessing that place where poetry comes from is different. That's what I'm understanding. And that writing poetry completes the circle. It's almost like fulfilling both sides, connecting both worlds.
I mean, the different genres of literature come from different places. There's no question. I envy the person who can write a poem and then write an article for the New York Times and then can start writing a novel. I wish I had that capability. But also, of course, it depends on how much you have to be tough on yourself. I mean, you can write poetry, but if it's rubbish, I mean, you have to admit it's rubbish. You know. Okay.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being patient, because I know there's another session about to start, and you've been waiting patiently. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to the oncoming session.
Thank you very much.